simulating that he was kind of raping her during that confrontation, and then she passionately kisses him. And then the ghost appears. I want to suggest that maybe the ghost is his own superego, his own conscience. And that when you have an angry superego, like somebody that we all are aware of in our current political state, what happens is you act in ways that are furtive and sometimes not very effective. And so, anyway, the ghost is telling Hamlet, you know, that he needs to make sure that his mother doesn't sleep with the uncle and that he avenge the ghost. And so Freud's reading of Hamlet, and he liked Hamlet a lot and wrote several papers about Hamlet, is that that if you look at Freud's idea of the Oedipus complex, which has to do with a young child who is very attached to his mother, and you can see in these film clips how attached Hamlet and Gertrude are to each other. She's very loving to him, actually. And, you know, like the first clip that we saw, you could see how much pain was in her face around him being depressed and losing his dad and all that stuff. But anyway, back to the Oedipus complex. So Freud's idea was that the child wants to possess the mother and thus must get rid of the father so that he can have the mother all to himself. And so in a weird way, Claudius is sort of a stand-in for Hamlet because he takes the mother and becomes king. And really the fantasy of young Hamlet would have been that he would take the mother and become king. So you see where the conflict comes in, the rub, so to speak, that that he's conflicted about who's the sinner here. And he even has a line about that. Like, you know, that he's as much a sinner as anyone. And so there's this kind of Catholic, very, you know, good, bad sort of super ego thing happening with Hamlet. And we know, we can sense that it's going to be at his own demise, that this isn't going to end well for Hamlet. And you all know that it doesn't, except for maybe those 3 people who have never seen it. And now I just gave you a spoiler, sorry. But it's like the whole thing is always building up to, you know, that Hamlet will die. And Hamlet, according to Freud, wasn't able to kill Claudius until Gertrude was dead. And then he was free to kill Claudius. And so anyway, there's those Oedipal readings of Hamlet that have been real important. Another thing that I think is important to think about is, and this has to do with the language and the character of Hamlet, is that he was, he's like a part of all of us in a way. His questioning of his parents and of what's right and what's wrong, and he's struggling with what appears to be kind of almost like a youthful crisis of faith, you know, like who's right and who's wrong here. And interestingly, when Shakespeare first started writing Hamlet, they think that he wanted or imagined Hamlet younger. And that's pretty apparent because he was in college, and a royal person would be going to college after 20 years of age in those days. And he also would have ascended the throne if he were a full man. And so the fact that the uncle took the throne and that Hamlet was in college kind of indicates that probably Shakespeare thought of him around 19 at the beginning of the play. But then as Shakespeare kind of wrestles with his own demons and writes all this beautiful prose and language and poetry, it becomes apparent to Shakespeare that Hamlet is a much weightier character, that he's more mature, that he's more thoughtful, that he's more, that he has something to say that a 19-year-old wouldn't be able to say. And so then by the time he wrote the graveyard scene, it's very explicit in that scene that Hamlet is 30. So that's usually the way it's played, like he's a young man, but somebody who is, you know, embarking on adulthood for sure. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. And as Allison brought up, the whole idea of Hamlet having lost a son at 11 years old, whose name was Hamlet, is kind of, you know, important, I think. I think it says that Hamlet was writing something passionate and something very, very personal and important to him. His father also died a year before he started writing on Hamlet. So he was kind of wrestling with the father-son idea and what it meant to be childless and how parents treat their children. I mentioned to Allison the first time we talked that sometimes I think of Hamlet as a treatise on bad parenting, because Polonius gives Ophelia really bad advice, and the ghost gives Hamlet really bad advice. Everybody's telling, you know, their kids the wrong things, and everybody's kind of not on the same page. And the truth is what Hamlet is trying to find, but it's so obscured by the adults and their needs and their manipulations and their control. And so, you know, you could kind of think of Hamlet also as a story about a young man who thinks that maybe he can find truth with a capital T, and then it turns out that he can't. And that's kind of a lesson we all have to learn, is that, you know, there isn't a single truth, and there isn't a single right answer to anything, that life is a lot more complicated than that. As far as Hamlet's depression, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that he idealized his father. He called him the Sun King in one passage, and he thought, and he missed him, and his father was important to him. And so, yes, he was grieving. Do I think he was psychotic from grief? No. I think he was mad with craft. And I think he knew exactly what he was doing pretty much all of the time. And I like what Allison said earlier, that I think it took him a month to make the move to kill the king, because he had to do it precisely. And so really he was more of a guy with a fencer's foil making a precise hit, as opposed to just gouging like he did with poor Polonius. And that's what he had to do with Claudius, is he had to be sure. So that's pretty much, I talked about aggressive superego, right? And I talked about Shakespeare, blah, 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 yeah. Okay, I think I covered all my main points. So does anybody have any questions? We have microphones down here at the end if you want to come down. And if you don't have any questions, Allison, do you have any questions? I have one for you.
Sure.
Okay, so the Shakespeare Festival is doing Hamlet for the second time?
Yes.
And what era is this Hamlet in?
So this Hamlet is set in the Baroque period, so 1616 to 1685-ish. And that was really, that choice was a conscious one in terms of aesthetic, when you consider the costumes of that period and also some of the architecture of that period. Because Because it's really important in our production to emphasize this idea of someone always watching, which I think elevates some of what we've been talking about of the secrecy and also kind of the, you know, how some of these emotions are manifested in different ways when it seems like you're never alone.
Right.
And so...
People were spying on Hamlet all the time, too. It was kind of awful. When the people say he was paranoid, that kind of ruffles my feathers a little bit because he had every reason to be paranoid.
So why would you not be paranoid? Yeah, so I think, part of that motivation was to be able to show that visually, that it's not just in the relationships technically, but also in very much the setting and the feel of the piece. And there's also this contrast between everything looking really nice and looking really pretty, and there being something very grotesque and uncertain and nasty underneath all of that.
Denmark.
Yeah, that's kind of the way to manifest the rotten in Denmark without doing something nasty to the set. So, yeah. Sure.
Hi, thank you for doing this.
Sure.
I love it to have this level of conversation. So, obviously, Zeffirelli's take is writing. But in my mind, that makes it a little smaller.
Smaller?
Smaller.
Yeah.
That if you're going from more of a, let's say, a Jungian viewpoint, that commonality, that it isn't just a gendered thing, that humanity, the passion a mother has for her children is not necessarily sexual.
Right.
And so it becomes a much larger, much more universal, I think, but you tell me. So are you talking about Freudian because of Zeffirelli? Or?
Well, no, I'm talking about it because of Freud and because I'm a psychoanalyst. But I also read Jung, and I don't think that Freud meant that children want to have intercourse with their mothers. I think what he meant is that they want to possess their mothers, that they want to have her all to themselves. And so it's a language, you know, it's like every century has a different way of expressing things, and Freud had a very 19th century way of expressing things. And when he would talk about the Oedipal complex, you know, he didn't mean literally that people were going to have sex with their mothers. He meant that there was a wish to possess their mother and to have her all to themselves because they're a little kid, and you know, and that would happen with a girl just as well as it could happen with a boy. In the Freudian interpretation of Hamlet, there's also a way to look at Ophelia's madness as being in part because Polonius was murdered so horribly and so suddenly, and she loses her kind of touchstone, which is her father, you know, and so there's an Oedipal story there too. But I agree with you that it's more universal, and I think it's more about humanity and not, you know, just about something as base as sex. But I did pick this movie in part because the way Glenn Close and Mel Gibson played it was so overt that it was kind of shocking and also kind of revealing. I think Glenn Close is such a good actress that on her face you saw so many different things happening. Like sometimes she looked like she was in kind of a sexual rapture, and other times she looked like she was in misery, and other times she looked like she just wanted to pick Hamlet up and hug him, you know? It was so intense, and so that's why I thought it was good.
Cool. Well, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? You can also shout them out if you don't want to come down to the microphones. Don't feel like you have to get
Here,
up.
I've got one.
Yeah.
There's a subversive element that swirls around the edge of this Shakespeare festival that is anti-Stratfordian. There are certain people connected for a long time that will tell you that other people wrote these plays. Now, I know that's a trite question, but
It's not
That sounds right. No.
number one, what do you think? And number two, it matters, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
So
totally your question.
that is my question. And I will say, so I did attend UMKC. I got my master's from UMKC. Dr. Landry was actually my professor for 2 years. So I was exposed to the authorship question in my graduate studies. And I think it's a really important question. I mean, because I think if we stop asking questions and we stop exploring where stories come from, then we're doing ourselves an educational disservice. So I totally agree that it's worth having that discussion. Because even when you look at Shakespeare's plays, you know, whether you think it's Shakespeare or someone known as Shakespeare who wrote them, there are lots of different voices prevalent. I think there's lots of different stories that get told. So I think sometimes we do have to step back and think of who influenced all of these stories. But I will say, I mean, I am a Stratfordian just because I think there's such a universality about Shakespeare's plays that I don't know that you have to be of a certain background to really access his works, and I think that's also true for Shakespeare's time as well, considering who his primary audience was. But I'm open to that discussion. I think it's a really lovely discussion to have because we don't have any foolproof for anyone, even for the man himself. Even though we have that, we have his name on manuscripts. But I think there's a time and a place for the discussion, certainly, and I love it. I think it challenges me to be more informed and to really kind of root myself in my own opinions too, and to understand also where other perspectives come from, and that's something that my education was invaluable for me to do.
Does everybody know about this controversy, or would you like her to define it?
So so some of you do know, some of you don't. So there is a belief that who we know as William Shakespeare, who has been attributed to the canon as we know it, was not the one who actually wrote Shakespeare's plays. There are various arguments for various different people. Probably the most prominent is the Earl of Oxford named Edward de Vere. That's the one that's really kind of been brought forward as a counter-author to Shakespeare's works. But there have been folks that think Christopher Marlowe had a hand in them, that some of Shakespeare's other contemporaries had a hand in them. I think Shakespeare in Love actually does something really interesting to explore some of that authorship, if any of you have seen that movie. And we did a play at Kansas City Actors Theater as part of our 25 for the 25th called The Beard of Avon that had all of these other different voices that were part of Shakespeare's time that I think engaged with that text in different ways. So it's just a belief that there is someone other than Shakespeare that is attributed as writer of Shakespeare's plays. And it's something that's been debated primarily among scholars and Shakespeare enthusiasts for mainly the last, I think, 100 to 200 years. I think a lot of this conversation really started 18th, 19th century. And I welcome people to make their own opinion. I think that's kind of the fun and the freedom of Shakespeare is to figure out the answer for yourself. So, yeah, yes, please.
Well, this doesn't prove Shakespeare wrote his stuff, but I've been doing genealogy for the last 10 years, and if you want a clear room, just start talking about genealogy. And, I'm a double cousin of William Shakespeare, and my ancestors were Sister Arden Bass married brother and Sister Arden Bass. You know what a double cousin is. And their mothers were sisters of Shakespeare's mother. And their so the Arden name, does that ring any bell to anybody? Okay, what is it?
Well, that family was so intermarried, it's just incredible.
Yeah. I think it's As You Like It. I may be getting the plays mixed up.
Yes.
It's set in the Arden Forest.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just one little clue as to maybe Shakespeare was writing about, he said it in his grandpa's farm. This Arden name appears in Shakespeare's plays. And that would be his maternal grandfather. And in the genealogy, they will say the name of Shakespeare's father was Thomas. He farmed Mary Arden's land. So some of those things come together where I think perhaps he did. And also, I have a friend whose ancestry went to the Houghton Castle, and supposedly the 2 years that Shakespeare is unaccounted for before he went to London and started writing was the Houghton Castle. And they put on these little plays in the summertime, sort of the traveling things, and Houghton had hired Shakespeare to be in charge of that and to teach dramatics. And there's still some evidence of that. And in one of the Shakespeare biographies, it mentions that 2 years at Houghton Castle. Anyway, if you start getting back into the genealogies, you find some interesting things, and it doesn't seem quite so preposterous. And the education, although a lot of it was with tutors, etc., at that time was more sophisticated for Shakespeare than we realize.
Sure. Yeah, and no, I think you bring up a lot of good points. And the name William Shakespeare exists in history. I mean, it's something that you can trace back and find in records. But
my husband and I, we did go to England one year, and we went to Stratford-on-Avon, and we saw Hamlet presented at the Shakespeare Theater there.
Mhm.
And the thing that I thought was interesting is that bedroom scene was very Oedipal. But Gertrude, I think like the English people, they're very sophisticated, and nothing was sophisticated about that presentation with this song. But if you talk to English people, they're so reserved and proper and everything, which Gertrude was in that scene, and yet she was very sexy. And I never could figure out how that combination came together.
sure.
Well, she was the Queen of Denmark. She
That's
wasn't.
not true. But thank you for sharing. I think, yeah, it's certainly interesting. Do you have questions?
I do. I was just wondering why Shakespeare would have set Hamlet in Denmark as opposed to France, Spain, Italy, somewhere else.
Well, one interpretation is that Hamlet is a Protestant play.
Well, I did notice he was going to school in Wittenberg, which would I think have been a Lutheran institution. That's where Luther was from. So I didn't know if they had any play in or not, but I'm just curious.
No, sure. I think there's a removal about Denmark as a setting that is worth exploring.
Well, I think there's some historical evidence that there was a Hamlet person in Denmark, and there was a Frottenbra in Norway, and that there is some, real historical references. Right?
Yeah, and I think there's also a way of exploring court and some of these really intimate moments within. Is that my fault? I'm sorry. Within Shakespeare's play. Oh, my mic just died. With Hamlet, that I think cited in England would have been too. I don't know that there would have been the allowance to do what was being done within this play had it been set in England. So I think there's just kind of a distance about Denmark and almost a foreignness about Denmark that I think makes this play really interesting, but then also having this touchstone of coming back for school.
Well, and what you're saying is really interesting too, because it suggests that Shakespeare did want to explore something different with his protagonist Hamlet, and an inner life and some questions and some issues that weren't Henry V and weren't like those other characters. And so, he put him somewhere else.
Yeah, I think there's a removal from his own time, from their own references that allow him to tell the story in a very different way. So, yes, I think there's time for just a couple more questions.
I'll move the mic around, actually, we record audio.
Oh, sure.
So, and just so everybody can hear, so if you have a question, we'll bring it. Did you have a question? Okay. Well, you're up next, and then I'll bring it.
Okay. There's an emphasis on how much was new with Shakespeare in literature, and I was thinking about that newness, and I was wondering what a psychoanalyst might have to say about human creativity. That didn't happen 100 years before or 1,000 years before. Would it have happened 100 or 200 years after? Or how do we assess Shakespeare's creativity at that time, and what might that mean for us psychoanalytically, if that word exists?
Right, right. Well, what Freud did believe was that repression was necessary for there to be creativity and cultural growth. Because if there wasn't repression or denial or defenses, then it would just run wild and we would not be writing beautiful plays. So, you know, I think that in Shakespeare's time, you know, he was obviously being extremely creative and also probably ahead of his time, because I don't think that the average person in those days, you know, had the kind of imagination or poetry that he had. But there's always been creative people since the beginning of time, you know, so I don't know what else to say about that.
Your question here?
Okay, can I ask you? Okay. I have to ask about the to be or not to be soliloquy, of course. Partly because it's so famous, partly because you talk about, you know, he's mad with craft, not truly mad, and that his questioning is part of us all. And I think that it also coming back to your comment about how someone is always watching and then how your feelings manifest when you know you're being watched. Because the Zeffirelli, when he delivers that soliloquy, he's clearly alone in the crypt. You know, the light shining down on him. But then you have the Branagh version where it's pretty clear he's being watched and there's some ambiguity about whether he knows he's being watched. So I just wondering if you could speak about that most famous soliloquy.
Yeah.
Go ahead, you start.
Okay. Well, I think it's interesting just because I'm thinking of the festival's production, and there's been some exploration in the rehearsal hall of Hamlet actually delivering that speech to Ophelia. And so what happens when there is actually an audience for some of these most kind of deep down raw questions of existence? And I think that does something even different from being alone or from this fear of being watched, because then it almost feels like a burying of oneself, kind of, I don't know what the right word I'm looking for, but almost a confessional in a way, of really kind of seeking solace in someone else that you don't get from other interpretations of that. I think it's the speech that we interpret most, you know, that kind of pervades our language the most, and yet I think there's little understanding of what the speech actually means.
Right.
This question of to be or not to be. Yeah. And I think if we actually understood it more, I don't know that it would probably have been a Trader Joe's flyer.
Right. I think it would be really different if he were all alone. You know, I think that takes on a very different feeling, and I think that's the one that most of us kind of think about when we either read or imagine that soliloquy. But I think that Shakespeare did intend for Claudius and Polonius to be overhearing him, and he knew that they were overhearing him.
I think that's about enough. Do we have one more question and then?
One more question, and
Yeah.
this will be our last question.
I'd like to return to the suggestion that Wittenberg played a part as a Protestant influence in the play. I think the play itself represents the conflict between the Catholic and the Protestant churches. I don't think we teach that very well here, but at that time it was extremely divisive. And I think part of Hamlet's conflict is, should he go back to Wittenberg? And he had two representatives from Wittenberg, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who were spying on him the way the Protestants did. And I think he's going through this terrible confusion. And at the beginning of the play, which we didn't see, Hamlet's father comes back from purgatory. Purgatory had been outlawed by the Protestant